The universe had always been vast, humbling in its infinity. But now something was wrong, terribly wrong. Stars, the very lifeblood of the galaxy, were going dark. Systems that had flourished for eons began to flicker and fade, one by one, as though someone had turned off the lights of the cosmos. Entire star systems vanished without a trace, their once vibrant suns replaced by an all-consuming emptiness, an unholy void. No one knew what it was. No one knew why it was happening. The greatest minds of the galaxy, from the reclusive Lorati to the powerful Wyvar, were stumped. As the darkness spread, fear turned to panic. Humanity had always been a small player in the grand scale of the galaxy. Their colonies, scattered across a handful of systems, had never been a match for the ancient and powerful civilizations that ruled the stars. Yet, time and time again, humans had defied the odds, pushing past their limitations, surviving the impossible, and even thriving where others had failed. It was this resilience, this unyielding will to adapt and survive, that had slowly gained them respect from other races. Now it was humanity's time to rise once again. Dr. Ilara Hawk, one of the brightest young minds on Earth, had been working tirelessly to uncover the cause of the cosmic disaster. For months, she and her team had been analyzing strange signals emanating from the edges of known space. It started as a faint hum, barely noticeable against the background radiation of the galaxy. But over time, the hum grew louder, more insistent. It wasn't random noise. It was a pattern, a message. Someone, or something, was reaching out. One night, as Dr. Hawk sifted through the latest data stream, she felt a chill creep down her spine. The message she had been decoding had finally resolved, revealing a single phrase: "The darkness comes for all." The words echoed in her mind, each one sending a shudder through her. What was this darkness? What could cause entire star systems to disappear? The data was sparse, fragmented, but there were traces of something ancient, something that had been buried in the farthest reaches of the universe for eons. Ilara immediately sent the information to the Interstellar Federation's High Council, hoping for guidance. She knew the Council's leaders, most of them from ancient and powerful races, would be skeptical. They had long seen humanity as an unpredictable, yet insignificant, species, but even they could not ignore the severity of the situation. Within days, the Federation's top officials convened. A galaxy-wide emergency summit was called, and humanity was asked to send a representative. As expected, the representatives of the major galactic races made their arguments. The Wyvar offered their unparalleled military might. The Lorati offered their psychic abilities to locate the origin of the threat, but none of their solutions seemed to work. The darkening was beyond their comprehension, and their power was ineffective against the consuming void. It was then that Dr. Hawk stood before them, her voice steady, but filled with urgency. "Humanity has always been an outlier in this galaxy," she said. "We thrive where others falter. We adapt, we fight, and we survive. And now we must lead this charge. The darkness cannot be stopped with just force or ancient knowledge. It requires something new, something bold. We have the potential to become the light the galaxy needs." The room fell silent. She wasn't asking for permission. She was offering a solution, a plan, a chance for humanity to become the galaxy's savior. The council stared at her, unsure. The idea was daring. It was risky. But at that moment, in the quiet hum of the chamber, they realized that there was no one else left to trust. Humanity, for better or worse, was the galaxy's last hope. The council agreed. The task was theirs. And so began humanity's journey to become the eternal light, the guiding force that would stand against the encroaching darkness, not just to survive, but to shape the fate of the stars themselves. The council had agreed, but the weight of that decision was not easily carried. Humanity, once a distant player on a galactic stage, was now entrusted with the fate of the universe, and yet with no real experience in confronting something as terrifying as the darkening. Doubts lingered like a shadow over the entire plan. Could humans truly rise to this monumental challenge? Captain Jace Callahan, leader of the Stellarborn Initiative, stood before his team in the war room of the flagship Orion's Vanguard. The crew, a mix of humanity's finest soldiers, engineers, and scientists, looked back at him with uncertain eyes. This mission, this first foray into the heart of the darkening, was a gamble. Every human in the room understood the stakes, but what they didn't know was how deep the darkness went. The mission was clear: infiltrate a star system already consumed by the darkening, a region where no other ship had survived long enough to gather any intelligence. It was a high-risk operation, and there were no guarantees. "We're the first," Jace said, his voice steady, "to venture into the unknown. We can't fail. For all the galaxy's talk of power, we're the ones who stand between the light and the void." His words didn't bring comfort, but they didn't need to. The crew was there because they had no choice, because the galaxy needed them, and because, for some, there was no greater calling than to face the unknown head-on, even if it meant never coming back. The Orion's Vanguard cut through the stars, its engines a beacon of humanity's defiance against the encroaching dark. As they approached the system, the first signs of the darkening were visible. A creeping blackness, like smoke, curling around the edges of a once thriving star. The system's planets were gone, completely obliterated. The light from the star had been drained away, leaving behind only a growing shadow. "We're approaching the event horizon of the void," said Lieutenant Coravale, the ship's tactical officer. "The gravity here is destabilizing. Any misstep could send us spiraling into oblivion." Jace clenched his jaw. He had led teams into hostile territory before, but this was unlike anything he'd ever faced. The absence of light, the palpable sense of emptiness, made his chest tighten. It was as though the universe itself was holding its breath. Suddenly, a blaring alarm cut through the silence. A powerful energy pulse rippled from the star, sending a shockwave through the ship's hull. The Orion's Vanguard shuddered, and the ship's systems flickered. "Report," Jace barked. "The star, it's not just dying. It's fighting back." Dr. Ilara Hawk's voice crackled through the intercom. She had stayed behind to monitor the ship's systems, but she was no less critical to their survival. "Something's inside the star. It's pulling the energy inwards, as if it's alive." A chill ran down Jace's spine. Whatever the darkening was, it wasn't just a natural force. It had intelligence, a will of its own. The realization hit him with a sickening finality. This wasn't just a battle for survival. This was a fight against something that had no care for life, a force that sought only to consume. "Bring us into orbit around the star," Jace ordered. "We need to get closer if we're going to understand what we're dealing with." The crew maneuvered the Orion's Vanguard closer to the now-dying star. The closer they got, the more unstable the gravitational forces became. The ship's shields were pushed to their limits as they fought against the immense pull, but still, they held steady. On the view screen, the star was almost unrecognizable. The outer edges had collapsed into a swirling vortex of dark energy. In the center, something unnatural stirred, a massive, shifting presence that flickered in and out of perception. Suddenly, a distorted voice reverberated through the ship's communications system, a voice that seemed to originate from the star itself. "You are too late." The voice was chilling, its coldness seeping into the bones of everyone aboard. The crew froze, the weight of the moment settling over them. The darkening was speaking. "We've only just begun," Jace replied, his voice steady despite the terror creeping up his spine. "And we're going to finish what we started." But as he spoke, he couldn't shake the growing feeling that they weren't just fighting the darkening. They were being hunted. The message from the darkening sent a ripple of unease through the crew of the Orion's Vanguard. It was clear now that they weren't just explorers or soldiers. They were intruders, pawns in a game played by a force older and more powerful than any of them had anticipated. As the ship remained locked in a precarious orbit around the decaying star, The crew worked tirelessly to make sense of the chaotic signals they were receiving. But the true nature of their mission was becoming clear. They weren't just investigating, they were fighting for survival. Dr. Ilara Hawk, her eyes bloodshot from days of sleepless analysis, had a new plan. It was one born of desperation, but also of a brilliant, dangerous idea. "We can't fight this with weapons or tactics," she said, her voice resolute. "We need to become the weapon." Jace stood in her makeshift lab, studying the holographic projections she had assembled. "You're talking about harnessing stellar energy, turning ourselves into weapons." Ilara nodded. "Yes, the energy of dying stars is unlike anything we've ever encountered. It can be weaponized, but more importantly, it can be used to evolve. If we can adapt the human body to channel this energy, we could harness its power, become something greater, something beyond the limitations of biology." Jace felt the weight of her words sink in. Humanity had never seen anything like this before. The idea was reckless, yes, but if it was the only way to fight the darkening, then it was their only hope. "I'll do it," Jace said without hesitation. Ilara's gaze softened with concern. "You understand the risks, right? The procedure might change you permanently. You might not be human anymore." Jace met her eyes with unwavering resolve. "If it gives us a fighting chance, I'll take that risk." Ilara nodded, her mind already calculating the necessary steps. They had no time to waste. The darkening was advancing, and it wasn't going to wait for them to finish preparing. The Genesis Initiative was launched immediately. Volunteers from Earth and the colonies, all soldiers, scientists, and engineers with the courage to face the unknown, stepped forward. They were chosen not only for their skills, but for their willingness to make the ultimate sacrifice. Jace and his crew weren't alone in this venture. They were joined by the best and brightest of humanity, each willing to risk their humanity in exchange for the chance to stop the darkening. The transformation process was grueling, a combination of cutting-edge genetic engineering and fusion with the raw energy of a dying star. The human body was not designed to handle such power, but the Stellarborn were different. Their cells were restructured to absorb and channel stellar energy, their bodies reprogrammed to withstand the immense forces they would now control. As Jace lay on the operating table, the sterile smell of the lab mixing with the hum of machinery, he couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. His body was about to become something more. It had to. The survival of not just humanity, but the entire galaxy depended on it. The procedure was painful, agonizing, even, but Jace endured. He wasn't just doing this for himself or for his team. He was doing this for everyone, humanity's last hope. When it was over, Jace stood, trembling, as his body recalibrated to the new energy coursing through his veins. His vision blurred, then sharpened, and he felt the world around him in a way he never had before. Every star, every pulse of energy, every gravitational shift. He could feel the void itself, its cold, malignant touch, and he knew that the darkening was not far off. It was still out there, waiting. "Captain," Ilara said, her voice trembling with awe and concern. "It worked. You're no longer just human. You're something more. The others are stabilizing." Jace clenched his fists, feeling the energy crackling at his fingertips. He had become a living conduit of stellar power, a force capable of altering the very fabric of space itself. "I'm ready," he said, his voice steady, but his heart racing. "Let's finish this." And so, the Stellarborn were born, each of them, transformed into vessels of raw cosmic energy, ready to fight the darkening in a way no one had ever dared before. But as they prepared to launch their assault, one question remained. Would they retain their humanity, or would the very power they sought to control ultimately consume them? The Orion's vanguard moved silently through the stars, a ghost ship now, its once gleaming hull reflecting the void as it drifted toward the heart of the darkening. The Stellarborn, Jace and his team, stood at the ready, their bodies humming with energy, the raw force of a dying star coursing through their veins. What had once been flesh and bone was now a vessel of power, transcending the limits of biology. But despite the incredible transformation, there was still a sense of something missing, a lingering question about whether they could maintain their humanity in the face of such overwhelming force. As the ship neared the center of the darkening, the very fabric of space seemed to warp. The stars around them flickered, their light flickering like candles before a storm. The gravitational forces of the collapsing star were unlike anything they had encountered before. Even the Stellarborn, whose enhanced senses could feel the cosmos itself, struggled to remain steady as the ship was pulled deeper into the void. "We're entering the heart of it," Jace said, his voice calm but laced with urgency. His body thrummed with energy, and it was almost too easy to let the power wash over him, to lose himself in it. But he refused. He couldn't afford to lose control. Not now. Not when the fate of the galaxy was at stake. Ilara's voice crackled over the comms, her calm demeanor masking the tension she must have felt. "The gravitational fluctuations are intensifying. We've crossed the point of no return. Whatever we find in there, there's no turning back." "Understood," Jace replied, glancing at the crew. The other Stellarborn stood tall beside him. Cora, the sharp-eyed tactical officer, Rook, the quiet demolitions expert, and Lyra, the cybernetic genius. Together, they were more than just soldiers. They were humanity's last line of defense. And yet, as they approached the heart of the darkening, doubt lingered in the air like an uninvited guest. Could they truly defeat what lay ahead? The ship suddenly jolted as an unnatural force gripped them. The very space around them seemed to collapse, folding in on itself. The Orion's vanguard shook violently, throwing the crew off balance. "Brace," Cora shouted, gripping the console tightly. Jace's body surged with power, and he instinctively reached out, drawing the surrounding stellar energy into himself to stabilize the ship. The world around him blurred into a cascade of energy pulses, the pressure building within his chest. But he held firm. They couldn't afford to lose control. "Take us through," Jace ordered, his voice a low growl. "We need to see what's at the center. It's there, the heart of the darkening. That's where it begins." The crew pushed forward, defying the crushing forces, guided only by Jace's uncanny ability to feel the flow of energy. The view screen displayed a surreal and terrifying sight. An immense black void, a rip in the very fabric of reality, where nothing existed except pure darkness. The ship passed through the event horizon of the collapsing star, and before them, a form began to materialize. The darkening. It was not a simple void or storm. No, it was an entity, an ancient, sentient being. The massive, swirling mass of energy twisted and roiled like an immense, living creature, its shape ever shifting, as though made of the very fabric of the universe itself. It was vast beyond comprehension, a blackened pulse that seemed to consume everything it touched. The space around it folded in on itself, distorting reality in a way that made Jace's mind spin. "I don't think we're ready for this," Rook muttered under his breath, his eyes wide as he gazed at the entity. It's alive. More than alive," Lyra whispered. "It's older than time itself. I can feel its presence. It knows we're here." Jace's body thrummed with energy, the star-forged power within him roaring in response to the darkening. It was as if the entity had recognized them, had marked them as worthy adversaries. A voice echoed through the ship's comm system, and though no sound had been made, it vibrated in their bones, deep and chilling. "You are too late." It was the same voice from before, but now it was stronger, more confident. The words reverberated through their minds, invasive and unrelenting. "You may try," the voice continued, "but you cannot stop what has already begun." Jace's heart pounded in his chest, and for a brief moment, doubt crept in. Could humanity really stand against something so vast, so ancient? He shook his head, forcing the fear aside. "We will stop it. It's what we're made for." In that moment, Jace felt the full weight of the responsibility on his shoulders. They weren't just fighting for their own survival anymore. They were fighting for the future of every living thing in the galaxy. "Set a course for the heart," Jace ordered. "We're ending this now." As the Orion's vanguard closed in on the Darkening's core, the crew prepared themselves for what was to come. They weren't just going to fight for their lives. They were going to fight for the light of the galaxy itself. The ship hurtled toward the heart of the Darkening, its hull groaning under the weight of cosmic forces. The gravitational field around them was growing stronger, warping space and time, twisting the very air they breathed. The crew of the Orion's vanguard held steady, their bodies infused with the raw celestial energy they had harnessed, but even the Stellarborn felt the pull of the black void surrounding them. It was as though the Darkening itself were a living entity, alive, conscious, and aware of their presence. "We're getting too close," Cora said, her voice strained. "If we go any further, the ship won't be able to hold together. It'll be torn apart." Jace glanced at her, his eyes hard and determined. "We don't have a choice. We need to face this head-on. We need to get inside the core, find out what's driving this thing." Lyra, who had been monitoring the ship's systems with her augmented eyes, spoke up. "I've never seen anything like this. The Darkening's energy signatures, they're unlike anything we've ever encountered. This entity, whatever it is, isn't just consuming stars. It's rewriting the fabric of the universe itself. It's trying to turn the galaxy into a reflection of itself." Jace's stomach tightened. This was worse than they had imagined. The Darkening wasn't simply a cosmic disaster. It was a predator, seeking to reshape everything in its image. Stars weren't just being extinguished. They were being consumed, absorbed into something far more terrifying. "We need to stop it," Rook muttered, his voice low but filled with certainty. "Whatever it is, we stop it now." As they drew closer to the core, the crew could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on them. The Orion's vanguard shuddered violently, every inch of its systems fighting to stay intact as the gravitational forces strained the ship to its limits. The view screen flickered, and the crew saw what lay beyond the veil of darkness. An enormous swirling mass of energy, an enormous spiral of shadow and light, its shape constantly shifting, impossible to fully grasp. "Is that its heart?" Cora asked, awe and fear evident in her voice. "Yes," Ilara replied from the command center. "That's the core of the Darkening, the center of its power." Jace's hand clenched into a fist, his eyes never leaving the screen. This was it. This was the heart of the enemy, and it had to be destroyed. But what they didn't know, what none of them had prepared for, was the sudden, deafening silence that followed as they entered the core's threshold. No alarms, no warning, just silence, the kind that made your skin crawl. Then came the voice again, but this time it was different. It wasn't the same cold, distant tone from before. This time, the voice was intimate, whispering directly into their minds. "You think you can stop me? You cannot. I have waited eons for this moment. Your light, your fleeting existence, means nothing in the face of what I will become. You will be consumed, and so will your pathetic galaxy." The voice felt invasive, like 1,000 whispers brushing against their consciousness. It was cold, unyielding, almost suffocating. Jace's heart beat faster as he felt the immense presence of the Darkening trying to invade his mind, to break him. "We've faced worse," Jace said aloud, forcing himself to focus. "We will not let you take everything from us." Suddenly, the entire ship seemed to shudder. The core of the Darkening began to shift, its shape folding in on itself as a massive, storm-like energy field erupted outward, slamming against the Orion's vanguard. The ship was sent careening off course, its controls locked by the overwhelming force of the energy. The crew's bodies were thrown against their seats, their vision spinning as everything around them seemed to collapse into a singularity. Jace's body flared with the energy that now ran through him, and he could feel the ship's instability through every cell in his body. It was as if the entire galaxy was collapsing in on itself. "Hold on," Cora shouted, her hands working furiously to stabilize the ship. But the force was too great. The ship was being sucked into the heart of the darkening, pulled further and further toward the abyss. "We're losing control," Rook shouted. "If we don't stop this now, we'll be lost forever." Jace's voice was steady, though his mind raced. "We can't lose. Not now. We've come too far." The energy that had been swirling inside him, the power of the stars, the transformation he had undergone, it surged to the surface, overwhelming his senses. For a moment, Jace felt like he was becoming part of the darkening itself, his mind tangled with its immense presence. But he fought to retain his sense of self, his humanity. He reached out with every ounce of his strength, focusing all the stellar energy inside him toward one singular purpose. He would push back. The ship bucked and twisted as the Stellarborn gathered their strength. Jace felt the overwhelming power of the darkening press against him, but with a shout, he unleashed a wave of energy, a raw, brilliant force that radiated outward like a supernova. The darkness recoiled. "We're not done yet," Jace gritted through clenched teeth. "We fight until the end." The Orion's vanguard stopped its fall, its crew gritting their teeth in defiance as they prepared for the final confrontation with the heart of the darkening itself. The energy that erupted from Jace was nothing short of a miracle. It was a force that shook the very core of the darkening, a burst of light so pure it threatened to undo the blackened mass before them. But even as the wave of energy surged outward, the darkening responded, shifting, swirling, and adapting in ways that defied reason. The heart of the entity seemed to expand, its tendrils of shadow reaching out to ensnare the ship once more. "We can't keep up with this," Lyra shouted, her voice strained as she tried to maintain control over the ship's failing systems. "We need more power." Jace's chest heaved as he fought to hold onto the energy inside him. His body burned with the intensity of the stellar force he had absorbed, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. The darkening's vast presence pressed against him like a weight, each tendril of shadow trying to drown him in its cold grip. "Captain," Cora called urgently, "we need to break through. Now. It's pulling us in again." Jace nodded, his face a mask of determination. He closed his eyes for a moment, focusing, tuning his senses to the flow of the universe around him. The very stars, the galaxies, the threads of cosmic energy. He could feel them all. They were within his reach, and yet they weren't enough. He needed something more. The heart of the darkening itself. He had to confront it directly, pierce the void with his own will. His mind reached outward, past the cold, consuming shadows. He wasn't just a vessel of stellar power anymore. He was something more, a channel for the very force of creation. His fingers trembled as he extended his senses deeper into the core of the darkening, following the threads of energy that wove the entity together. It was alive, yes, but it was also fragmented, disjointed, as though parts of it were constantly in conflict with one another. It was an entity of destruction, yes, but there were cracks in its foundation. "I can feel it," Jace murmured, almost to himself. "There's a weakness." "What?" Rook demanded, his voice laced with urgency. "What do you mean? Tell me, Captain." "There's a nexus at the center," Jace replied, his eyes flashing open. "A place where the darkening's power is concentrated. If we can reach it, we can disrupt its entire structure. We can stop it." "But the heart is impossible to reach," Ilara said, her voice cautious. "You saw what happened. The force here is beyond anything we've ever studied." Jace turned to her, his eyes fierce. "We've never faced anything like this before, but we've never had anything like us either." He gestured to the crew, the Stellarborn, now more than human, more than soldiers. They were the bridge between the universe's raw energy and the living, breathing forces of light. And together, they could tear down the darkening. "Prepare yourselves," Jace said, his voice a command. "This is the final push. If we're going to win, it's going to be now." The crew braced themselves, each of them tapping into the power they had been granted. Jace closed his eyes again, feeling the universe pulse around him, drawing its energy into his body like a floodgate opening. The stars screamed in his ears, and the galaxy bent and twisted with his will. His mind pushed deeper into the core of the darkening. Every pulse of light he sent into the abyss met with a violent response. But still, he pressed on. He could feel the darkening center, its nexus, like a heartbeat in the void. It was the place where the entity's power was most concentrated, but it was also its most vulnerable point. All he had to do was find a way to strike it. The ship began to vibrate, its hull creaking under the pressure of the forces at play. The air was thick with energy, and Jace could feel the darkening pulling at his very soul, trying to twist his thoughts, tear his consciousness apart. But he focused. He had to. If he gave in now, the galaxy would be lost. And then, with a sudden surge of strength, Jace felt the threads of the darkening's power snap. He reached out, focused his mind, and for the first time, he connected with the core of the entity. The connection was instantaneous, and it was violent, like a lightning strike that consumed his entire being. For a moment, there was nothing but white-hot pain. The power of the darkening raged inside him, threatening to consume him whole. But Jace fought against it, pushing back with every ounce of his will. He was human, and that meant something. With a final cry, Jace directed every ounce of energy he could muster at the core, flooding it with the very essence of light, the raw, unyielding power of stars. The ship shook violently as his will collided with the darkening's nexus, the force of it sending shockwaves through the very fabric of reality. The stars flickered. The galaxy groaned. And then, suddenly, the darkness began to retreat. The Orion's vanguard groaned in protest as Jace's mind locked in a battle with the darkening. The force of their collision was unlike anything they had experienced before. The ship rattled, every surface shaking under the immense pressure of Jace's energy, which had now fully engulfed the core of the entity. The stars outside flickered violently, dimming as though the very light of the universe were fighting to hold its ground against the oppressive, all-consuming blackness. But Jace was not deterred. His hands clenched into fists, his body glowing with the energy of 1,000 stars. He could feel it now, the weakness at the heart of the darkening. It was a fragile point, a momentary flaw in the otherwise perfect destruction of the entity. He could reach it. He had to. The power of the darkening surged within him like an ocean storm, crashing against his mind. But Jace's focus was absolute. The energy within him pulsed, drawing deeper, and he poured every ounce of his will into the crack in the entity's structure. It wasn't just a fight against the darkening. It was a battle to reclaim the galaxy itself. He could feel the presence of every living thing, every star, every planet, and every civilization across the galaxy, all depending on him. "Hold on, Jace." Ilara's voice came through the comms, filled with urgency and fear. "You're pushing yourself too far. The energy, it's too much." He barely heard her. The universe had become a chorus of light and dark, an overwhelming sea of sensation that he had learned to control. But now, as his power reached its peak, there was a terrifying truth. If he couldn't stop the darkening now, everything would be lost. The darkening responded to his push with a blast of energy so intense it felt like the fabric of space itself was being torn asunder. The ship's hull screamed in protest as the external shields failed and the control systems flickered. The Orion's vanguard was on the verge of total collapse. "Captain," Cora cried, "we can't withstand this. The ship's gonna." But Jace didn't answer. He couldn't. He had to keep fighting. The tendrils of the darkening pressed closer, tightening around his mind, suffocating his thoughts. It was a force that had existed long before humanity had even begun to think of the stars. But Jace wasn't afraid. He had come too far to back down. The memories of every human that had died, every sacrifice made, flashed through his mind. His crew, his family, Earth itself. The fear of failure vanished, replaced by an unshakable resolve. With one final push, Jace summoned all the energy he had within him. The energy that had coursed through his veins, the power of the stars. He channeled it, focused it into the very heart of the darkening. For the briefest of moments, everything in the universe stopped. Time itself seemed to bend and twist, and in that singular moment, Jace broke the darkening. There was a blinding flash, too bright, too powerful for the human eye to comprehend. And the entire core of the darkening was shattered. The darkness recoiled, its form warping, splintering, like glass under the force of a hammer. The oppressive pressure that had been weighing on the ship lifted, replaced by an eerie silence. For a moment, the universe seemed to hold its breath. The Orion's vanguard lurched forward as the gravitational forces of the darkening were torn apart. Space itself began to unravel, the destructive entity collapsing in on itself, its power fading, its grip on the galaxy slipping. The stars began to shine again, slowly, tentatively, as the galaxy's balance was restored. But Jace was not unscathed. The force of his attack had drained him to his limits. His body crackled with the raw power that remained, but it was fading. He stumbled, his vision blurry, his mind dizzy from the strain of holding on to his humanity, while channeling the raw energy of the cosmos. Jace, Ilara's voice cut through the haze. Jace, speak to me. Are you? His chest heaved as he struggled to keep his consciousness intact. It's over. And then, with a soft sigh, Jace collapsed into the arms of his crew, the last remnants of his energy flickering out. The stars above shone brighter now, their light no longer obscured by the suffocating force of the darkening. The battle was over, but the victory was bittersweet. They had won, yes, but the cost of that victory was high. Jace, the captain who had led them all, had given everything. And even as the galaxy began to heal, the crew of the Orion's vanguard knew that the scars of this war would linger far longer than they could ever imagine. The Orion's vanguard floated in the silence of space, its once glorious hull battered and scarred from the battle that had nearly torn it apart. The darkening, the cosmic nightmare that had threatened to devour the galaxy, was gone. The stars were no longer dimmed by its oppressive presence, but the victory came at a heavy price. Jace lay unconscious in the med-bay, his body ravaged by the immense energy he had channeled to destroy the heart of the darkening. His skin was pale, his breath shallow, but the faint hum of life support kept him tethered to the world. He had sacrificed everything for the galaxy, and now it was the crew's turn to carry the weight of that sacrifice. Cora stood by his side, her hand resting lightly on his. She had been through so much, fighting, leading, surviving, and yet, seeing Jace like this, so still and vulnerable, shook her more than anything else. The captain had given up everything. He had given his very essence, his humanity, to save them all. He'll wake up, Rook said quietly from the doorway, his voice more gentle than usual. He has to. Cora didn't answer. She just squeezed Jace's hand, a silent promise that they would carry on. The battle was over, but the war was not. There was a galaxy to rebuild, civilizations to heal, and a future to forge. Ilara entered the room next, her eyes full of concern but tempered with hope. The galaxy is free. The stars are shining again, but we still have a long road ahead of us. Yes, Cora replied softly, turning to look at her. The fight for survival is over, but now we need to rebuild, to unite the shattered worlds. We will, Rook said with quiet resolve, stepping forward. Humanity has always found a way to rise from the ashes, and now we have something more than just our will. We have the power of the stars themselves. The crew of the Orion's vanguard had witnessed the birth of a new age. The darkening, an enemy beyond comprehension, had been vanquished, not by armies or weapons, but by the very essence of the human spirit. The Stellarborn had become something more, something greater than the sum of their parts. They had tapped into the raw power of the universe itself, proving that humanity, despite its flaws, had the potential to shape the stars and bend reality to its will. But that was not the end of the story. The universe was vast, and with the darkening gone, there were other threats to face, other unknowns waiting in the far reaches of space. It was a sobering thought, but one that only fueled their resolve. The Orion's vanguard was more than just a ship now. It was a symbol of humanity's resilience and potential. Cora walked out of the med bay, her eyes focused on the stars beyond the viewing port. There were so many questions left unanswered. Who had sent the darkening? Why had it come? The answers were out there somewhere, but the crew would face them together, just as they had faced the heart of the darkening itself. A new chapter had begun. As Cora stood at the helm of the Orion's vanguard, looking out over the vast expanse of space, the first rays of a new dawn broke through the darkness. The stars shimmered brighter than ever before, their light a beacon of hope and possibility. The human spirit had proven to be the guiding star of the galaxy, not just surviving the dark, but shining through it, stronger than before. And as the ship soared into the vast unknown, the crew knew that they were ready to face whatever the universe had in store for them next. Together, they had conquered the impossible. Together, they would forge a future worthy of their sacrifice.